Hey there, thank you for tuning in to The Paradox, a podcast where I connect with people around the world to talk about global paradoxes and their possible solutions. The Paradox has a new episode every Friday, so if you want to stay up to date, I would kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel. And for now, enjoy this episode. My guest for today is Lejla, and Lejla is Bosnian, and I've known Lejla for quite a lot of years actually. Not that many years to be honest, but we've built like a very, very strong friendship over the years. So Lejla, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, we know each other for 7 years, I think.
7 years, yeah, maybe 6 or 7 years.
I think it started with a request on Facebook for dancers and people that wanted to share their stories with me. And somebody tagged you in my Facebook post. And ever
Right, yeah.
since, we have invited each other on birthdays. And that was for quite a long time. And then we started actually hanging out besides birthdays together. And that was fine. And ever since, we have this super strong friendship. So it was very interesting how this entire friendship evolved.
Definitely. Yeah, I that's kind of funny because that's we basically bonded over Tarkan at your birthdays. Like that's literally how we bonded.
But we still
Like that's
bond
got
over
Tarkan.
Tarkan.
Yeah, exactly. And in today's podcast, I want to talk to you about your social media detox primarily, but we also will discuss other topics. So let's just start with the first question, which is what is your relationship with social media and the internet in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, right now I feel like I have broken up with a toxic boyfriend that I've been in a relationship with for way too long. And right now I'm basically rediscovering myself in a way without this toxic boyfriend. I feel like right now I finally have the time to be grounded and to actually like feel and see and discover certain things without having a distraction that demands so much of my attention from me. So I feel like in a way I'm very liberated without social media. So to your question, what's your relationship with social media? I don't have a relationship with social media anymore.
You broke up with social media.
Broke up with social media. And actually, today marks my 4 months without being on any platform at all anymore. And it really feels so good. And I've never, it's so weird how an app out of a sudden becomes such a huge part of your life. And you spend so much
Right, yeah.
time and hours on an app. And it gives you anxiety, it gives you dopamine kick.
What do you think the distraction is? Like what is the distraction that social media causes?
The fact that you always want to be updated with things that are so irrelevant to your own life. The fact that, you get these DMs from your friends or you get these DMs from strangers or whatsoever, and you automatically want to see what they want to tell you and what they have sent to you, or those kinds of things. That I feel like that's my distraction, or that was my distraction, being so up to date with everything that didn't affect my life in the slightest.
It's kind of like fear of missing out, no?
Yeah, and you know what so I have been thinking about this because my social media adventure started when I was 10, 11 years. I feel like that was a time when we went on Hives and MSN, and that's when it really started. So in a way we grew up with it. And when I was 15, I started being on Instagram, and this app started all fun for me because it was a way to retouch my pictures. It was a way to I don't know, even not following people, but just those filters and the weird Starbucks pictures that we posted with those weird hashtags. That's how Instagram essentially started for me. And then it evolved in this marketing machine that basically slurped all of my attention from me and all of my yeah, all of my attention from me. And it's so weird how this innocent app became something so life consuming almost. As well as
Yeah.
Facebook, though. I've never really been on Twitter because Twitter was like a whole different world to me. A lot of trolls, a lot of fake news, a lot of, um, a lot of like very fast news and very fast, very fast news that I saw. And I was like, I don't really want to interact with this. But then I feel like Instagram really replaced that as well, but in terms of pictures.
Let's talk about that first. Like, let's talk about the fake news first, because I feel like that's one of the big topics that we discuss a lot as well, about how I don't know. It's always so selective, and I think like what is happening in Ukraine right now is a good example of how selective media is, because even in Dutch media, like the way that they cover it is like day one of the war, day two of the war, but what about Syria? What about Palestine? You know what I mean? Like, it's so selective that if it's a white person or if they have a lighter skin tone, then it's relevant and they're not a terrorist. But if you go down the scale, it's terrorism, it's this, it's that, it's unrelatable. Like, what do you think like the danger in that is?
Well, it's so interesting that you just mentioned this because maybe for all of the viewers and all of your listeners, I right now do my MA in politics and sociology in Ireland. And first of all, I really have to say how open-minded Irish people are as white people, because I feel like there are so many cultures and so many nations that aren't as open-minded as Irish people. And obviously um I live in a very like woke bubble, let's put it like that. And we actually had this discussion, and it started on Monday, and I'm at the end of my week right now in terms of classes. And, it's a thing that we continuously see uh, that's reoccurring, and that's been brought up by my lecturers as well, which is so interesting. But, the other day we were like talking about this huge climate change report that came out and basically said that we're doomed, that there are so many things irreversible already, and we don't hear about it anymore because this war in Ukraine keeps us busy. Also, the fact how Dutch media, or like media in general, portrays this as something we have never seen before in Europe. And I'm like, wait, but what about the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina? That's very much Europe still as well. And, there was a genocide happening. Obviously, right now, we don't know how long this war is going to take. We don't know when this war will end. We don't know what the outcome is, because this could eventually mean that a lot of evil leaders could maybe copy the behavior of Putin and, basically spread his entire rationale, but in a different country, and get away with it. So it's a very interesting time that we're living in. There are so many things happening, and yet we zoom in on one very interesting and significant part. But there are also so many other wars and also so many other problems that this world basically currently faces. I mean, we have Yemen as well. I don't even want to know how many children they're dying because of famine. I don't even want to know how many Palestinians are still being forced out of their houses because of a colonial imperialist rule. We still have Syria, where a leader is basically disarming one part of his army. I mean, like, we have so many problems. And, this entire narrative of indeed white refugees, it's really daunting, because I remember when the Netherlands decided to take in, 150 Afghan refugees, and that there were like protests, that they were like, oh yeah, they're going to bring destruction, they're going to bring Islam into our country, we don't want these, yeah, exactly, we don't want these brown people in our country. And when we're talking, for example, about like white people coming into our country, we're totally fine with it. But the root of the conflict doesn't change. They're both fleeing for a threat that they perceive in that very moment. So it's really daunting to see how racist the world is. and how we give privilege to indeed people, to how we give privilege, or how privileged white people are in this sense. And I'm not trying to like make the issue, any
About
less
race, like
important
the
or
race
whatever.
starters. Yeah. Because I think that's mostly what people think, that if you talk about these issues, that you're automatically pulling the race card. Oh, it's always about race. But when is it not about race? You know what I mean? Like, I never really get why people, um, and especially white people do this. They always say like, "Oh, it's always about race about you." But when was it not about race for you? You know what I mean? Like, that's basically how we are separated from each other economically, socially, like everything. Like the way that the world's divided, it's super super clear. And then I feel like um, censorship in itself already is something that's dangerous, but then add social media censorship on top of that, and it creates like this fire, you know. Like that's why I think that censorship on social media is so dangerous, because one, you kind of guide people in the way that they should think and the way what they see, you know. Like you give them an idea of what is important and what isn't important. And then misinformation is also something that sort of creates hate. And now with like COVID-19, it basically escalated even more to be segregated and feel like everyone is different and everyone is dangerous, you know. So for me, like, I'm curious, like, what do you think we can do now as a society to sort of move forward from this and find some sort of coexistence in each other's presence?
Yeah, that's a really, really hard question, because I feel like this 4-month detox has basically changed my entire view and perception of social media. And I feel like social media shouldn't be a credible news source and news outlet, and I only see that now. Yeah, I think that's an issue. I mean, I feel like social media also has this responsibility to say like, hey guys, what we just do is basically like either stating certain facts that scientists or researchers or whatever already have like confirmed or denied or whatsoever. Yeah, it's a really hard question, and I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't know how to solve this question. I just really feel like social media should have this filter basically, in order to decide, or like not even in order to decide, but I feel like it should have a filter for fake news and non-fake news, and really control certain posts even more. I feel like opinions are so different than facts, and opinions shouldn't be facts. That's what I think. And I feel like that's the danger of social media nowadays, the fact that, everyone can say something and that's their opinion, but, opinions are really different from facts. And we have scientists, we have researchers, for a reason. Yeah, it's just it's a very difficult question, I would say. What do you think?
Well, I think that basically the most important thing of all is to do your research, because indeed social media is not a credible news source. And I feel like once people start to understand that it's not a credible news source, they might actually diversify into different news sources. But then again, one example that I want to give to you is that, for example, recently, I think a couple of days ago, there was this terrorist attack in the Apple store in Amsterdam, where a guy held people hostage. I don't know what the reason was or why, but I think like eventually he wanted something like 200 million euros in cryptocurrency or something like that. But because the guy was white, he was labeled as a hostage holder and not a terrorist. And in that moment, I was really thinking about what would this guy have been labeled, let's say, if he was from Afghanistan or something like that, you know? Like, I find it super interesting how social media, it fuels
A narrative.
like a narrative, but the news itself, like news source itself, they do this as well. Like, and you have to imagine that if credible news sources like the newspaper or whatever, like TV channels, if those are your only means of finding news, and those are also selective in the way that they present news, where do you find your news, you know? So I think like it's definitely about doing your research and knowing where to find your news. And if you do a little bit of research, like you can actually find very credible sources. One thing that I do find is very helpful, and that's actually like a way of using social media to get news, is let's say in Ukraine, in Kiev, when it started, you can actually search a geotag on Instagram. So you can search Kiev as a geotag, like a place on Instagram, and get like a actual relevant news um, timeline, basically, of actual events that are happening there by local people. I feel like that is like one of the ways to get credible news. Search for news by local people, or the way that they document like news. But in general, I think like there should be some sort of filter, as you said, to make sure that this censorship doesn't um, extend, but also that the way that fake news sort of has, I don't know, like open field to play. It's actually like it's very concerning to me. Like it's super concerning that people get away with it. And even if you look at, let's say, I think there was a debate or in a Senate or something with Mark Zuckerberg and what is her name? Alessandria
Yeah,
Cortez?
AOC. Yeah.
AOC, and she was literally asking him questions, and or was she asking him questions, or was it like another one? Like there was a debate, and they were asking him about privacy policy. Yeah, I think it was them against each other, and he basically couldn't answer like a lot of these questions. No, it was like AOC, and she was talking about Trump. Like during the Trump election, she was basically asking what Trump basically could do to get voters or to get like sponsorships or something on Facebook. And basically, the conclusion was that he could lobby into these big firmas that basically work in his advantage to basically get voters, which then made me realize that I understand like the whole idea of like the 1% and the wealth distribution and stuff like that, but it is actually quite concerning, especially for our generation, like the new generation of millennials, because we are so hyper aware of what is happening around us that we cannot look away anymore. And like you mentioned about irreversible climate change, for example, like we cannot look away from it anymore, because if it's over, it's over. Like we're fucked basically, and we're already the generation that is basically living in like a fuck generation. Like the generation before us, they basically mounted all the resources that we had and they exploited it. So we are basically left with their scraps, and now it's even getting worse and worse. So yeah, I feel like in general there needs to be some sort of institution or whatever that regulates social media, but also regulates the media in general, so that it still sort of is unbiased in a sense. Because if white people make the news for everyone, it's obviously not going to be inclusive, because you cannot talk about people that you don't understand. Like if you talk about things that you don't understand, there's always going to be misinformation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And you know what you just said about like news and stuff, I feel like also it's our responsibility to look at various news websites. I mean, like I really find Al Jazeera a very credible news website. I feel like, especially during the Syrian war, I mean, what I've really seen in the Netherlands when this war just started is that people were very insensitive towards the situation of so many Syrians, because I feel like we haven't seen the devastation in the Dutch media. And I really was wondering why, because when I would look at Al Jazeera, for example, who actually like stated what was happening in Syria, and who was like actually portraying the devastation that Syrian people were encountering and were facing, I really feel like people would be a lot more sensitive towards refugees. I feel like Al Jazeera really like brought it very raw to us, because it's a very raw and a very dangerous conflict. And you know, it's so important to not rely on just one news source, and it's so important to always like look on a second side, or like a to have like a different view as well, hear a different view. I feel like that's the only way how you can be critical. You know, I'm very much convinced of my political views and of my world views, because I dare to look at the different side. And you know, when I hear the different side, I try to go into a conversation as neutral as possible, and listen to certain opinions as neutral as possible. But at the end of the conversation, or at the end of an article, or at the end of a paper whatsoever, I'm like, okay, well, this person definitely has a point, or maybe he or she or they don't have a point. Why don't they have a point? At the end, sometimes it really confirms why I'm so sure of certain beliefs, and why sometimes I'm not sure of certain beliefs. So I really feel like you need to hear different sides to one event or one story or one, and as soon as you start, ignoring certain stories, or selectively zooming out, or selectively not wanting to hear another side of the story, that's how ignorance is created. I feel like, do you remember like the entire Black Lives Matters demonstration, and basically like the scream of Black people to say like, hear us, this is what we have gone, like this is what we have been through, this is what we're still going through. It didn't end with like abandoning slavery, etc. Like we still face violence every single day. And the most painful thing was especially white people that did not even want to hear another side of the story. And it's very problematic when those people have high power, are in politics, and basically are saying, what Black people have to say, it doesn't matter, it doesn't apply to us, so why would we listen to it? And that's selective, and that's selective ignorance. And you choose to be ignorant in that way and in that sense. And it becomes even more problematic if like multiple people listen to that same politician, or listen to that same influencer, or listen to that same like whatever like important person, and agree with that fact. And that's how you really create ignorance. And I have also been thinking, is this the reason why I don't want to have anything to do with social media as well? Because I don't want to, you can choose what you want to hear, but because I listen to multiple stories as well, and because I read multiple things, I'm really convinced of my own beliefs, and I just don't want to engage in ignorance. I just don't want to anymore. And I've read a lot. I know how the world thinks about certain things that they should care more about: racism, the environment, or climate change, colonialism. I mean, like I have my facts about that, and I just don't need to hear it anymore. I just cannot deal with the bullshit anymore, because it brings me down, it puts me down, and I have even less hope for humanity than I already have. Very pessimistic, but it's really true.
No, it's very true. And my final question to you would be, how do you think your relationship with social media is going to evolve in the future?
I don't think I will have a relationship with social media anymore in the future. I mean, like, I feel so liberated right now by not having those dopamine kicks. I feel so liberated right now with something not like asking for my attention. I don't think I ever want to go back to social media, because it doesn't really add any value into my life. So I would say I will not have a relationship with a toxic boyfriend anymore. I think that's a very powerful way of seeing it. Yeah, basically. But what I do miss of this, and this is like my most honest thing. What I do miss is when I'm not really like up to date with, for example, artists that I really want to see that announce their tour on social media. I have to find out on Ticketmaster by like, refreshing a page, or like looking for a specific artist. So that's the only thing that I miss. So, that's something. But, for the rest, I really don't miss social media, and I will never, ever go back. As I just said, I feel like I'm finally out of a toxic relationship. I feel like it's a very powerful choice. And I think things like finding concert for artists is just a little bit of more effort, but I feel like the reward of everything else, of like making the decision to completely like step away from it, is very, very powerful. Thank you for your time, Lejla. Thank you for having me. This was so fun, and thank you, and I wish you all the best with your amazing podcast.
Thank you. And maybe until next season.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, see you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for watching The Paradox. If you want to see more episodes, please subscribe to the channel.